Hello everyone. Today we will start reading our History NCERT book, Our Past, Part 1. Chapter 1: What, Where, How, and When. What can we know about the past? There are several things we can find out: what people ate, the kinds of clothes they wore, the houses in which they lived. We can find out about the lives of hunters, herders, farmers, rulers, merchants, priests, craftspersons, artists, musicians, and scientists. We can also find out about the games children played, the stories they heard, the plays they saw, and the songs they sang. People have lived along the banks of this river for several 100,000 years. The name of the river is Narmada. Some of the earliest people who lived here were skilled gatherers, that is, people who gathered their food. They knew about the vast wealth of plants in the surrounding forests and collected roots, fruits, and other forest produce for their food. They also hunted animals. Some of the areas where women and men first began to grow crops, such as wheat and barley, about 8,000 years ago, are located in the Sulaiman and Kirthar hills to the northwest. People also began rearing animals like sheep, goat, and cattle and lived in villages. The Garo hills to the northeast and the Vindhyas in central India were some of the other areas where agriculture developed. The places where rice was first grown are the north of the Vindhyas. About 4,700 years ago, some of the earliest cities flourished on the banks of the river Indus and its tributaries. Later, about 2,500 years ago, cities developed on the banks of the Ganga and its tributaries and along the seacoast. In ancient times, the area along these rivers to the south of the Ganga was known as Magadha, now lying in the state of Bihar. Its rulers were very powerful and set up a large kingdom. Kingdoms were set up in other parts of the country as well. Throughout, the people traveled from one part of the subcontinent to another. The hills and high mountains, including the Himalayas, deserts, rivers, and seas, made journeys dangerous at that times, but never impossible. So men and women moved in search of livelihood, as also to escape from natural disasters like floods or droughts. Sometimes men marched in armies, conquering others' lands. Besides, merchants traveled with caravans or ships, carrying valuable goods from place to place. And religious teachers walked from village to village, town to town, stopping to offer instruction and advice on the way. Finally, some people perhaps traveled driven by a spirit of adventure, wanting to discover new and exciting places. All these led to the sharing of ideas between people. Names of the land. Two of the words we often use for a country are India and Bharat. The word India comes from the Indus called Sindhu in Sanskrit. The Iranians and the Greeks who came through the northwest about 2500 years ago and were familiar with the Indus called it the Hindus or the Indos, and the land to the east of the river was called India. The name Bharata was used for a group of people who lived in the northwest and who are mentioned in the Rig Veda, the earliest composition in Sanskrit, dated to about 3500 years ago. Later, it was used for the country. Finding out about the past. There are several ways of finding out about the past. One is to search for and read books that were written long ago. These are called manuscripts because they were written by hand. These were usually written on a palm leaf or on the specially prepared bark of a tree known as the birch, which grows in the Himalayas. Over the years, many manuscripts were eaten away by insects, some were destroyed, but many have survived, often preserved in temples and monasteries. These books dealt with all kinds of subjects: religious beliefs and practices, the lives of kings, medicine, and science. Besides, there were epics, poems, plays. Many of these were written in Sanskrit, others in Prakrit or Tamil. We can also study inscriptions. These were writings on relatively hard surfaces such as stone or metal. Sometimes kings got their orders inscribed so that people could see, read, and obey them. We can also study inscriptions. These are writings on relatively hard surfaces such as stone or metal. Sometimes kings got their orders inscribed so that people could see, read, and obey them. There are other kinds of inscriptions as well, where men and women recorded what they did. For example, kings often kept records of victories in battles. There were many other things that were made and used in the past. Those who study these objects are called archaeologists. They study the remains of buildings made of stone and brick, paintings, and sculptures. They also explore and excavate to find tools, weapons, pots, pans, ornaments, or coins. Some of these objects may be made of stone, others of bone, baked clay, or metal. Objects that are made of hard, imperishable substances usually survive for a long time. Archaeologists also look for bones of animals, birds, and fish to find out what people ate in the past. Plant remains survive far more rarely. If seeds of grain or pieces of wood had been burned, they survive in a charred form. Historians, that is, scholars who study the past, often use the word source to refer to the information found from manuscripts, inscriptions, and archaeology. Once sources are found, learning about the past becomes an adventure as we reconstruct it bit by bit. What do dates mean? When somebody asks us the date, we probably mention the day, month, and year. These years are counted from the date generally assigned to the birth of Jesus Christ, the founder of Christianity. So, 2000 means 2000 years after the birth of Christ. All dates before the birth of Christ are counted backwards and usually have the letters BC, before Christ, added on. We have seen that inscriptions are inscribed on hard surfaces. Many of these were inscribed several hundreds of years ago. All inscriptions contain both scripts and languages. Languages which were used as well as scripts have changed over time. So, how do scholars understand what is inscribed? This can be done through a process known as decipherment. One of the most famous stories of decipherment comes from Egypt, a country in North Africa where there were kings and queens about 5,000 years ago. Rosetta is a town on the north coast of Egypt, and here an inscribed stone was found which contained inscriptions in three different languages and scripts, in Greek and two forms of Egyptian. Scholars who could read Greek figured out that the names of kings and queens were enclosed in a little frame called a cartouche. They then placed the Greek and the Egyptian signs side by side and identified the sounds for which the Egyptian letters stood. Once they knew what the letters stood for, they could read other inscriptions as well. Thank you so much for listening to me. If you like the video, please like, share, and subscribe. We'll be back with a new video soon.